Welcome to the Book Voices channel. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with our latest book discussions. Now let's dive into today's book.
Ever think about those almost obvious truths, the things everybody just kind of nods along to?
Yeah.
But what if the real breakthroughs, the real game changers are actually hidden in questioning those very assumptions?
Mm.
Like those things everybody takes for granted.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our source material today, it actually starts with this really powerful question and asks, what important truth do very few people agree with you on?
Ooh, that's a good one.
And that right there is that contrarian spirit that we're going to be really leaning into in this deep dive today.
Right.
We're not after those comfortable echoes, we're not looking for confirmation. We're digging for those kind of unexpected, those almost uncomfortable insights that can give you a genuine edge, a real advantage in how you see the world, how you think about your work, how you build your future. The things that really make a difference.
Absolutely. And that's what sets this apart from, just reading a typical business book or listening to a standard podcast episode.
Right.
We're not here to retread familiar ground. We're here to really challenge ourselves, to think differently, to question the status quo.
To push the boundaries a little bit.
Exactly. Because as our source really brilliantly argues, finding that true value, it often means looking where others aren't even bothering to look.
Right.
Thinking from those first principles instead of just following those, those well-worn paths that everybody else is on.
The beaten track.
Exactly. That's where those aha moments, that's where they tend to strike.
And our guide down this less traveled road today is Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 Notes on Startups or How to Build the Future.
Great thought.
Now, this isn't your standard, business school textbook kind of stuff.
Sure, not at all.
Thiel has been in the trenches, right? He co-founded PayPal, he co-founded Palantir, and he was an early investor in companies that they've reshaped entire industries. We're talking Facebook, we're talking SpaceX, these companies that have had a massive impact on the world. So what we're looking at here isn't just some abstract theory, it's battle-tested wisdom, hard-won experience from someone who's actually shaped the world we live in.
Yeah, he's not just talking about it, he's done it.
He's been there.
Right. And what makes this book so compelling, I think, is its focus on the fundamental nature of progress. Thiel lays out this really crucial distinction, right? There's this one-to-one progress, which is essentially about scaling existing ideas.
Taking what works and just doing more of it.
Exactly. Taking what works, making more of it, think globalization, applying proven models in new markets.
Just replicating what's already out there.
Exactly. Exactly. And then there's that 0 to 1 progress. This is the truly transformative stuff.
The big leaps forward.
Exactly. Creating something entirely new, bringing something into existence that it didn't exist before.
Right. Going from nothing to something.
From 0 to 1.
Okay, I love this 0 to 1 versus 1 to n thing. And the book uses China as a really, really clear example of that 1 to n, that horizontal progress.
Yeah, great example.
Right. They've seen just incredible economic growth by taking those established technologies, those practices from developed nations and implementing them on this massive scale, right? Building infrastructure, modernizing industries, essentially following blueprints that someone else had already created.
Exactly. Replication, expansion, it's all about taking what's already out there and making it bigger, making it more widespread. And it's been undeniably an engine for their growth.
Right.
But the core argument of the book, and this is where that contrarian edge really comes in, is that for companies here in America to truly lead the future, we need to be shifting our emphasis, right? Sharply towards that 0 to 1 progress, the vertical progress.
The breakthroughs.
Exactly. Developing those groundbreaking technologies, creating those novel solutions, the things that fundamentally change the game, change the landscape.
And the reasoning behind this, it's pretty compelling when you start looking at the bigger picture, right? Like the book points out that globalization, without that kind of fundamental technological leap forward, it hits some pretty hard limits, right? Especially when we talk about things like resource limitations, the environmental impact. If everybody's just trying to scale up those less efficient ways of doing things, well, the consequences could be pretty devastating.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. As the book lays out, doubling energy production using, outdated, inefficient technology, well, you're just doubling the pollution.
Yeah, you're not really solving the problem.
Right, right. And, if If developing nations were to try and just replicate the current American lifestyle using only today's tools, well, the planet couldn't handle it.
It's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. So true progress, the kind that paves the way for a genuinely better future for everyone, it really hinges on creating those fundamentally new, far more efficient technologies.
Right, those game changers.
Right.
And this kind of groundbreaking technology, the book argues, it doesn't just magically appear, right? It often comes from startups. These relatively small groups of individuals who are united by this really clear, almost like a missionary zeal, a real sense of purpose.
Yeah, they have a mission.
Right, and they're driven by it. Think about those pivotal moments in history, right? The founding fathers, the Royal Society, even those traitorous 8 who broke away to launch Fairchild Semiconductor. All of these were small, really focused teams, but they had this really powerful vision.
And a willingness to challenge the status quo.
To break the mold. And what I think is particularly insightful here is how the book defines a startup. It says, the largest group of people you can convince of a plan to build a different future.
I love that definition.
It's so simple, but it's so profound.
It's not about, just launching a new app or creating a new gadget. It's about a deep-seated belief in a future that doesn't yet exist, and that ability to really rally others around that vision.
To inspire people.
Exactly. And at the heart of that lies, new thinking, that real willingness to question those accepted norms, challenge that conventional wisdom. So for you listening to this, when you look at your own endeavors, your own projects, your own companies, are you truly forging a new path? Are you creating something truly new? Or are you primarily scaling something that's already been proven somewhere else?
Right.
Because it's that former, creating something new, that's where the real game changers emerge.
That's where the future gets built. And, this focus on creating something truly new, it really connects with the lessons that the book draws from the dot-com bubble, right? Like it paints this really vivid picture of the late 90s, a time of real economic unease, where the established old economy seemed to be struggling, and the internet boom was hailed as this almost like a magical pathway to a brighter future.
It was the new frontier.
It was the Wild West.
Yeah.
Anything was possible.
Right. There was this pervasive sense that the internet held the key to unlocking this whole new era of progress and prosperity.
Right.
And PayPal, in its early days, it really embodied that mindset.
Oh, yeah.
With this audacious mission to create a new internet currency.
To replace the U.S. dollar.
Basically, yeah. To replace the U.S. dollar. A pretty bold vision when you think about it.
And their first attempt at that, like beaming money between Palm Pilots.
Yeah, not exactly a hit.
Not exactly a hit, yeah. It even earned a spot on a list of like the year's worst business ideas.
Ouch.
But they pivoted, right? They showed real agility. They shifted their focus to email payments.
Yeah.
And that's when things really started to take off.
Yeah, that's when they found their footing. What's remarkable though is how quickly PayPal managed to secure like significant funding right before the bubble burst.
Yeah, they got in just under the wire.
They did. The anecdote about that Wall Street Journal article and that South Korean firm wiring them millions of dollars without even a formal agreement, it really captures that moment, that frenzied, almost euphoric atmosphere of the time.
It was a wild time.
It was. And, that influx of capital, it proved absolutely vital for their survival once the crash actually hit.
Yeah, it gave them the runway they needed to weather the storm. And when that crash inevitably came, I mean, the widespread interpretation was that this was it. This was, the end of that tech optimism, that the bubble had burst and that was that. But the book, it offers this really interesting contrarian perspective on the lasting lessons from that period. It basically argues that maybe the opposite of that conventional wisdom is actually closer to the truth.
Yeah, it flips the script.
Yeah.
So instead of advocating for, excessive caution in the wake of that crash, the book actually suggests we should risk boldness over triviality.
Interesting.
It makes the case that even a flawed plan is often better than having no plan at all.
I like that.
Right. And then, crucially, it argues that intensely competitive markets, they actually erode profits.
Mm-hmm.
They squeeze the margins. And finally, it really underscores that sales and distribution, they're just as critical as the underlying product itself. You can have the greatest product in the world, but if you can't get it in front of the right people, it doesn't matter.
It's all about execution.
It is.
Yeah.
So for you, listening to this, The key takeaways from that dot-com period are you being bold enough in your thinking? Do you have a clear plan, even if it's not perfect? Are you really mindful of that competitive landscape? And are you prioritizing how you're actually going to get your product, your service, your idea into the hands of users?
How are you going to reach your market?
Exactly.
It's almost suggesting that while that market peak of March 2000, that was undeniably a moment of irrational exuberance.
Oh, yeah.
But it also maybe represented this peak of clarity.
You're
right?
right to say.
This fundamental recognition that we need truly valuable new technology to actually move forward as a society.
We can't just keep doing things the same way.
Right. We need those breakthroughs.
Exactly.
And this leads us, I think, really nicely into another core idea from the book, the idea that, as it says, all happy companies are different. And the surprisingly strong case that it builds for monopolies.
Okay, now this is where things get a little controversial.
Yeah, right. Because when most people hear that word monopoly, it's negative, right?
It has bad connotations.
It conjures up these images of a company unfairly dominating a market, stifling innovation, kind of like the evil corporation.
Right, jacking up prices, not caring about customers.
But the book, it presents this really different lens, right? It focuses on what it calls a true monopoly.
Okay.
And a true monopoly is a company that is so exceptionally good at what it does that no other firm can offer a reasonably close substitute.
So it's not about just being big or powerful.
No, it's about being so good that you're in a category of one. And the book, it uses Google in search as the classic example of this.
Yeah, makes sense.
Right, like once they established that significant lead over Microsoft and Yahoo, it wasn't really competing in that traditional sense anymore.
Right, it was playing a different game. And the book contrasts this with what it calls, and I love this phrase, the lies of competition.
Oh, tell me more about these lies.
Well, non-monopolists, they often try to downplay the intense competition they face, right? They'll say things like, oh, we're in a league of our own, or, we're the only ones doing what we do.
Right, trying to create that illusion of uniqueness.
Exactly. Or they'll strategically define their market so narrowly so they can claim dominance, even though it's kind of artificial, like that hypothetical British food restaurant in Palo Alto.
Right, like, oh, we're the only British food restaurant in this specific zip code.
Exactly. Completely ignoring the fact that they're competing with every other restaurant in the entire city.
Right, the bigger picture. And the book clarifies that while monopolies can certainly be detrimental in a stagnant market, where they're just kind of acting as rent collectors, not really innovating.
Right, just extracting value.
But the kind of creative monopolies that we're talking about here, these are engines of progress.
They're pushing things forward.
Creating new things.
Exactly. They generate entirely new forms of abundance, offering customers choices they simply didn't have before.
Like they're expanding the pie.
Exactly. Think about Apple's iPhone. It wasn't just a slightly better phone. It created this entirely new market category.
It changed the game.
It did.
Yeah.
And the prospect of those significant monopoly profits, well, it provides a powerful incentive for continuous innovation. It allows for that long-term strategic planning that companies locked in these head-to-head battles, they just can't afford to do.
It's like playing chess versus playing checkers.
Right, exactly. You have to be thinking several moves ahead.
Right, thinking long term. And the book, it even touches on the government's kind of paradoxical approach here. On the one hand, they grant patents to create these temporary monopolies to encourage innovation. But on the other hand, they also pursue antitrust actions to dismantle monopolies.
It's a tricky balance.
There's a tension there.
Yeah.
And what I find really insightful is the book's critique of economists' almost dogmatic adherence to competition as this ideal market structure.
Yeah, the free market gospel.
Right.
Yeah.
Like competition's always good no matter what.
Yeah.
But the book argues that this is often based on these outdated models, these ideas borrowed from 19th century physics, this notion of equilibrium leading to stasis, a kind of heat death for the business world.
So competition can actually stifle innovation.
Right. If everybody's just focused on surviving, on competing on price, there's no room for those big leaps forward.
Makes sense.
So the core insight here is that a creative monopoly, a company that's so good at what it does that it's in a category of one, that's actually a win-win situation. It delivers those new and improved products that benefit everyone, and it also provides those sustainable profits for the innovator. In contrast, relentless, cutthroat competition that often leads to razor-thin margins, little real differentiation, and just this constant struggle for survival.
So it's not always about being the biggest or the loudest. Sometimes it's about being the best.
Right, creating something truly unique and valuable. And this ideology of competition, as the book calls it, it extends far beyond just economics, right? It's this deep-seated belief system that shapes how we think about almost everything.
It's ingrained in our culture.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's certainly evident in our education system, right? This constant, this tournament-like atmosphere where students are fiercely competing for those coveted spots at elite universities, and then for what are often seen as, the most desirable career paths.
Right. It's like a never-ending race.
And the financial burden of this competition, these ever-increasing tuition costs, it's pretty remarkable.
It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
The author actually shares this really personal anecdote about his own pursuit of a Supreme Court clerkship, which is like, the holy grail for law school graduates.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate prize.
Exactly. And he talks about how, he was so focused on achieving this goal, but then he realized later that not getting it actually opened up these far more interesting and impactful opportunities for him.
It was a blessing in disguise.
It was. It highlights how sometimes, losing a seemingly crucial competition can actually be a really good thing in the long run. It can free you up to pursue something even better.
It can be liberating.
Exactly.
And the book provides some really vivid examples of how destructive that intense rivalry can be in the business world.
Yeah, it can get ugly.
Like the long-standing feud between Larry Ellison of Oracle and Tom Siebel. Or even those early, almost comical battles between PayPal and Elon Musk's X.com, which apparently got so heated that one engineer jokingly designed a literal bomb.
A bomb?
Yeah.
That's taking competition to a whole new level.
It shows you how that kind of mindset can escalate.
It's like a disease.
And the book makes this really crucial point that if you find yourself locked in a fierce battle with a competitor and you can't definitively win, sometimes the most strategic move is actually to find a way to merge, to join forces.
And cooperate.
To cooperate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what PayPal and X.com ultimately did.
Right.
They merged out of this shared concern about the looming .com crash.
They realized that fighting each other was actually hurting them both.
Right. And if you do find yourself in a competitive fight that you absolutely have to win, the advice is clear. Fight to win decisively and swiftly. Don't get bogged down in these prolonged, draining battles over insignificant issues fueled by, pride or ego.
Don't let your emotions get the best of you.
And the book uses this analogy from Hamlet of being willing to fight even for an eggshell to illustrate this self-destructive tendency.
So it's about choosing your battles wisely.
It is. And recognizing competition not as this inherent virtue, but as this potentially destructive force that needs to be carefully navigated and ideally avoided. That's a key insight for anyone looking to build a truly successful and sustainable business.
Absolutely. It's about understanding that competition can be both a motivator and a distraction.
Right.
You have to be strategic about it.
Yeah.
And this leads us to the intriguing idea of last mover advantage. While escaping competition is obviously crucial for establishing that monopoly, the book emphasizes that long-term durability, the ability to maintain that dominant position well into the future. That's what ultimately determines real success.
It's not just about winning the battle, it's about winning the war.
Exactly. And the book uses the contrasting valuations of the New York Times and Twitter, around the time of Twitter's IPO to illustrate this point. Even though the New York Times was profitable at the time and Twitter wasn't, Twitter's valuation was significantly higher. And that was because investors believed in its future potential to generate those monopoly-like profits, whereas the Times, its era of dominant market share, it was seen as being in the past.
So it's all about those future cash flows, that potential for growth.
Exactly.
And the book highlights this really common trap that entrepreneurs fall into, where they get so focused on achieving that rapid short-term growth, they completely lose sight of that fundamental question of long-term viability.
Mm-hmm.
You can hit those impressive user acquisition numbers, you can meet those quarterly revenue targets, but still be building a business that it lacks the foundation to thrive in the long run.
It's like building a house on sand. It might look good for a while, but eventually it's going to crumble. So what are those defining characteristics of a company that can actually generate those sustainable cash flows far into the future?
Well, the book outlines 4 key attributes of durable monopolies.
Okay, light on me.
Proprietary technology, network effects, economies of scale, and strong branding.
So let's unpack each of those. Proprietary technology.
Yeah, this is often the most fundamental advantage because it creates a significant barrier to entry for competitors.
Right, it makes your product incredibly difficult to copy.
Exactly. Google's search algorithms are a great example of this. Their algorithms are so sophisticated, they're so advanced, that it's incredibly difficult for anyone to replicate them effectively.
They're light years ahead. And the book suggests that this technology needs to be at least 10 times better than any existing alternative in some crucial dimension to truly create that monopolistic advantage.
It's not about incremental improvements, it's about those order of magnitude leaps. It's about being so much better that it's not even a competition.
Exactly. Think about that hypothetical drug that eliminates the need for sleep.
Okay, now you're talking.
Right. Or how PayPal made buying and selling on eBay dramatically faster and more secure than mailing checks. It was a quantum leap forward.
And then there are those network effects, right?
Yeah.
Where a product or service, it becomes more valuable as more people use it.
Yeah, the classic example here is social media platforms, right?
Yeah.
The more people who are on Facebook, the more valuable it becomes for each individual user.
Right, because you have a larger network to connect with.
Exactly.
Wow.
But the book makes this really interesting point that these kinds of businesses, they often have to start by dominating these incredibly small, these niche markets to gain that initial critical mass.
Right, to get the ball rolling.
Exactly. Like Facebook, they started by focusing solely on Harvard students.
Right, so it's about finding that beachhead, that small market where you can really gain traction.
Exactly.
And then there are economies of scale, right?
Yeah, this is where a monopoly business often becomes stronger as it expands, because the fixed costs associated with developing and maintaining the product, those can be spread across a larger and larger customer base.
Right, so your costs go down as you get bigger.
Exactly. And software startups, with their near zero marginal cost of producing another copy of their software, they benefit enormously from this effect.
Right, because once you've built the software, it costs practically nothing to distribute it.
Exactly.
And then, of course, there's branding.
Yeah, a well-established and respected brand. That can be a really effective way to signal the existence of a monopoly and build customer loyalty.
Right, it's a shorthand for quality.
Exactly. But the book, it cautions against prioritizing brand building over fundamental substance. It uses Marissa Mayer's efforts at Yahoo as an example, where, they tried to revitalize the brand, but it didn't necessarily translate into groundbreaking new products or services.
Right, it was more about style than substance. The book also emphasizes this strategic importance of scaling up thoughtfully, by first establishing a dominant position in a specific niche market, and then gradually expanding into those adjacent and related markets. Like Amazon, they started with books.
Yeah, brilliant example.
Right. They dominated that market, and then they branched out into virtually everything else.
It's a classic example of starting small and then gradually expanding your reach. The book also advises against that conventional Silicon Valley notion of disruption,
Like going head-to-head with the big guys.
Exactly. It suggests that a smarter approach is often to avoid that direct competition altogether, to make the overall market bigger, as PayPal did by expanding the entire online payments landscape.
Right. Instead of trying to steal market share, you're creating new market share.
Exactly. And ultimately, the book argues that while having a first-mover advantage can be helpful, it's actually far less important than being the last mover. Making that definitive, that lasting breakthrough in a particular market that allows you to reap those long-term rewards of a sustainable monopoly.
So it's like playing the long game.
It is. It's like mastering the end game in chess.
Right. Setting yourself up for success that will last for decades.
Exactly.
This brings us to a really fundamental question that the book raises, and it's a question that's often debated. In the realm of business success, building these great companies, is it primarily a matter of luck, or is it the result of skill and deliberate planning?
Right. Is it nature or nurture? Are entrepreneurs born or made?
Exactly. We often hear successful individuals like, Malcolm Gladwell, Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos. They readily acknowledge the role that good fortune played in their achievements. They'll say things like, oh, I was just in the right place at the right time, or I got lucky with this one decision.
Right. They're not afraid to admit that luck played a part.
And there's certainly a cultural tendency to maybe downplay the significance of planned success, right?
Yeah.
And to kind of romanticize the idea of of chance encounters and serendipitous moments.
In the myth of the overnight success.
Right. But the book, it offers this compelling counterpoint,
Yeah.
highlighting that previous generations, they had this very strong belief in their ability to actively shape their own destiny through hard work, through careful planning, through persistent effort.
They believe that they could make their own luck.
Right. And the core of the argument here is that if success is truly just a random roll of the dice, if it's all just a lottery, then the whole endeavor of learning about startups, studying business strategy, diving into innovation, it becomes meaningless.
Right. Why bother if it's all just up to chance?
Why put in the effort? And this naturally leads to the book's exploration of what it called definite versus indefinite attitudes towards the future.
Okay, I like this distinction.
Right. A definite perspective means you have a relatively clear vision of what the future is likely to look like, and you actively take steps to shape it according to your goals.
Right. You have a plan, you have a roadmap.
You're intentional about it. An indefinite view, on the other hand, it treats the future as inherently hazy, unpredictable.
So you're just kind of reacting to what comes your way.
Right. You're focused on process over those tangible outcomes, and you tend to accumulate options without committing to a concrete plan. The book actually uses the contemporary American education system as a somewhat critical example of this indefinite approach, where students are encouraged to explore a wide range of subjects, to keep their options open, but often without this clear sense of direction.
Right. They're told to follow their passions, but they might not even know what their passions are yet.
And the book, it draws this distinction between definite pessimism,
Right.
which is this belief that the future is going to be challenging, and therefore requiring careful preparation. It uses China as a potential example of a nation taking this long-term, albeit maybe somewhat pessimistic view. And then there's definite optimism, which is this conviction that the future can be significantly better through proactive planning and hard work. And that kind of characterize much of the Western world for a significant period of time.
Right. There was this belief that progress was inevitable.
It was this sense of forward momentum.
Exactly.
And the book also talks about the emergence of indefinite optimism, which is this somewhat passive expectation of progress without a clear roadmap for achieving it. And the book links this to the experiences of the baby boomer generation who kind of grew up in this period of unprecedented economic growth and prosperity where things seem to just naturally get better.
So they maybe take it for granted a little bit.
Right. And this indefinite mindset, it even permeates other areas,
Yeah, I can see that.
In finance, money can sometimes become an end in itself with this preference for endless optionality, over concrete investments.
Right. Not wanting to commit to anything specific.
And in politics, there's often this strong focus on those short-term public opinion polls rather than articulating and pursuing these long-term strategic visions.
It's all about winning the next election, not necessarily about building a better future.
Right. And the book even touches on how this probabilistic thinking has influenced fields like biology and pharmaceutical drug discovery, where there's this shift towards this kind of random screening of millions of compounds rather than this more focused, hypothesis-driven approach.
So it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Right. And ultimately, the book makes this really powerful case that long-term, definite planning, it's significantly undervalued in this indefinite world that we live in.
We've lost sight of the importance of planning.
And that a startup, when approached with this clear vision, this concrete plan, it represents one of the largest endeavors over which you can actually exert this definite mastery. You can actually push back against the notion that success is solely a matter of chance.
So it's about taking control of your destiny.
It is. It's about shaping your future, not just letting it happen to you.
Now, shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about where that significant financial capital often.
This marks the end of part 1 of our book discussion. If you enjoyed the content, let us know in the comments. Your feedback will help us decide when to share part 2.